Good morning. Continuing our review and summary of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis, following along the essay that I wrote with that precisely in mind. We are on page, let's see, I think page 16. Let me just pull it up. So we have this essay posted on our WhatsApp group. We're now in chapter 3, page number, I believe it's page 16. I want to double check. Yeah. Page number 16. So we've now entered into, after discussing the effect of the divine soul's contemplation of Shema on the animal soul, in chapter 1 of this essay. The power of Ner Mitzvah in chapter 2, we're now in Torah Ohr. What is Torah Ohr? So we began by citing the Rebbe Rashab himself, that it refers to Ohr Atzmi, that reveals the deepest levels of the divine, and that coupled with Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, the candle of the soul, and Ner Mitzvah, the candle of the mitzvah, elevates the human being and all of existence to the highest levels of Elokus, and actually transforming the mind of the animal soul into thinking like the divine mind. And then we learned inside a section from the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, where he explains Torah Ohr is Amshachas Ein Sof Mamay Lamata. It's transmitting the divine infinite light from the top down, and it's being basically fulfilling the purpose of existence. The purpose of why a human being was created is to draw down into the cosmic structure, into Ishtalshlus, an Ohr that's higher than Ishtalshlus, as he put it here. And then finally the piece he brought from Rabbi Yehuda, whose entire involvement was in the zikin, in the laws of damages, to clarify who merits and who loses, basically in a case where there's a discussion where somebody caused damage to another person. So he's bringing down this Torah Ohr even into a world like that, into a world where there is darkness and there are disagreements and there are possible damages. And he brings this level of bittul because he was Terosim Nosei, like he said, his entire involvement was Torah, a bittul that his mouthpiece, his very being, is a channel of God's halacha, of God's words. And he explained the two different ways of learning Torah, one like a servant who's learning what the master, what the king wants to command, and the other is like the king himself, like an ambassador of the king who is learning it like the king himself would be learning it. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, who channeled Hashem's words into existence. And that's where we stopped. So we're middle with the first paragraph on page 16, and now we're going to continue the second paragraph if you want to follow along. If not, it's also fine. I'll be translating and explaining everything. So now the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe, that talks about these matters has an explanation. There's a beard on that Maimer. So if you look in Torah Ohr of the Alter Rebbe, you'll see a Maimer and it's a beard and it's beard. So now I'm going to be citing from the beard where he continues to elaborate what is Torah Ohr. And here's what he says: Be'beard al druzeh b'Torah Ohr sham. In the explanation of this Maimer in Torah Ohr of the Alter Rebbe, page 39a and b, Lamates Aleph Beis Meisif, he adds the following: Till now he called it Eir Ein Sof before Ishtalshlus. Now he says it's Eir Ein Sof that Pre-Tzimtzum, precedes the Tzimtzum. Gam la'acharat Tzimtzum. So you're drawing the divine energy, Pre-Tzimtzum, into an existence that's Post Tzimtzum. Because remember, existence itself, like we learned, is subject to the Tzimtzum. That's an existence that's dependent on God filtering and regulating the flow so existence can exist. Torah is divine consciousness that's pre-existence. Can we have in existence a consciousness that's pre-existence? And the answer is yes, that's Torah. Shari kavonos at Tzimtzum, because the intention of the Tzimtzum, and keep in mind that always the working example that really works well to understand is like the teacher who has to convey an idea to a student that doesn't have the breadth and the full understanding yet of the idea. So he has to dilute it and condense it through a tzimtzum to feed him, like spoon feed him, the olive bays or the ABCs of the idea. So he says like this: the kavanah of the tzimtzum is lias nasa mokim poni v'cholol. The kavanah of the tzimtzum, which in turn creates a space, a mokim poni, a space and a chol, an empty space, meaning leaving space for another consciousness. What's the purpose of it? It's not an end in itself. Is that afterwards, through the work of man, through a person's avodah, an effort, be'elam haza, in this world, sheyasava al yedei tzimtzum zeh, which was created through this very tzimtzum, yumshech liyas gili habitul liyas erei sof lamata kamay lamayla ma'at tzimtzum. So the intention is not to remain in that state, that the student remains only learning the ABC, for example. The goal is that the student should expand his containers, and through effort and work and diligence will come to understand and experience and understand that which is pre-tzimtzum. So therefore, in Elam Haza, there should be hamshach of the bittel of Ein Sof Lamata, the way it was l'baylam etzim shelo yeh hester v'helam kamei kodim shenivra. And there should be no concealment and no covering like it was before the creation. So in other words, when a student grows and understands, he ultimately comes to understand what his teacher understands. The teacher as he was pre-tzimtzum. So the whole tzimtzum is in order to allow the flow. So right now, because the student is young and inexperienced, so you have to regulate the flow in a very limited way. But the goal is that it should grow and expand, and that the student should ultimately understand exactly as the teacher does pre-tzimtzum, as it was before the Kodim Shenivra. The same thing Lamaila, that existence, yes, is predicated on a limited flow of divine energy, so you can have an existence like ours, an independent consciousness, but the goal is that through our Avodah, we should come to expand and grow, that we can receive the Ohr with the bittel, and a level of bittel as it was pre-tzimtzum, Kodim Shenivra. Hainu, Shekamoisha Ohr Kodim at Tzimtzum, meaning, the way the Ohr, the way that consciousness was there pre-tzimtzum, kach yeh mamash hagilui lamata shelo yaster tzimtzum klal. So too should it be exactly that same way below, where the tzimtzum does not conceal at all. That's the kavanah. So you begin by first a tzimtzum that limits the flow, but then the avodah of the person is to grow and to maximize and draw down the energy exactly as it was pre-tzimtzum, post-tzimtzum. As it is from God's perspective, as it is before God. That the whole tzimtzum is only from our perspective. So God doesn't see it, the tzimtzum does not affect God. The teacher, his intelligence doesn't get diminished when he's teaching ABC to a student. But the student does get a limited flow. And the goal is the student should see it exactly as the teacher sees it. That we should see it exactly as it is by the Eibishter, by God, that there's no tzimtzum. The tzimtzum does not affect him. Not that there's no tzimtzum, it doesn't affect him. Like we said, we learned in Ayin Beis, that from God's perspective, the tzimtzum has no effect. Meaning the concealment is only from the point of view of the Olamis, the worlds. V'zeu dafka al yedei haTorah. And this is achieved, this avodah that he's referring to is through dafka, through Torah. Because Torah accesses. Torah is coming from the original engine room, if you wish, pre-tzimtzum, so it's giving us that consciousness in when we learn Torah. Like we learned, it reveals the depths from within the darkness, meaning within the tzimtzum, it goes beyond the tzimtzum, the depths that lie behind the tzimtzum, behind the curtain. From the depths I call to God. These depths. What depths? The depths that are pre-tzimtzum depths. That when a person exerts themselves in Torah, the bittul, with a selflessness, because without the bittul, you're not going to have this level. The Torah could be studied as an academic exercise, and with your mind and with arrogance or with ego, you're not going to have. So you need the Eisika Torah b'bittul. Mamshichim b'chinas Erein Sof Mamish. You literally draw down Erein Sof Mamish. Shalamayla Mat Tzimtzum. The Erein Sof, the divine consciousness, pre-Tzimtzum. Sheyeh Yizgalu Lamata B'Asiyah. And that should be revealed below in the world of Asiyah, in the lowest of worlds. Lahafech chashecha dafka l'nehera, to transform dafka darkness to light. The higher worlds, there's no darkness. But here, to transform the darkness to light. Atkan teichen dvarav. Okay, Atkan is the teichen, the content of the words of the Alter Rebbe, in explaining what we learned earlier, what the power of Torah is. Ayin Sham. Look there for more, obviously. So now we've added a dimension of what Torah Ohr is, and here I sum it up. The Sikum, in sum, a type of summary of all the above, works like this. In addition to the work of the divine soul, Ner Hashem, Nishmas Adam, Milmata L'mayla, B'Krishma, and that's an Aveda Milmata L'mayla, that a soul below is davening and contemplating on Hashem Echad and divine unity. Lifel Bittel, V'avas Hashem Gamba Nefesh Abamis, to affect a bittel, a sublimation, a taming, and the love of God also in the animal soul. So that was the first step of Avodah, Shema, that the Nefesh Elikis affects the animal soul. V'nesef, in addition to that, and to the ala ner mitzvah, in addition to the ner mitzvah that before davening we put on talis and film, and general mitzvahs, sheyesh bos gula miyuchedes, that has a unique feature and quality, levader lahalis hanefesh habamis va'elam, to refine and elevate the animal soul and the world. Those are the two things we learned earlier. So in addition to all that, hine b'neisef lezeh, in addition we have a third thing. Nimshach lanu Torah Ohr. We were transmitted to Torah Ohr. So in addition to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, its work from the bottom up. Ner Mitzvah, we're given Torah Ohr, the Torah of light, Mamayla Lamata, from the top down. Ohr Atzmi. It's an Ohr Atzmi. It's not just a Ner, a candle of the mitzvah. This is now a Ohr Atzmi, a core, essential, divine expression. Lifel, which, like we just learned from Pre-Tzimtzum, we don't say that on the other levels. Lifel should affect Nefesh Abamis, B'chol hadvarim gashmi shebe'elam, that the animal soul and all the physical objects in the world, Hashemen, which is compared to the oil in the analogy of the candle, the wick, the oil, and the fire, Yiyu nechlolim be'er haTorah, should be encompassed in the light of Torah. K'fi she'izbor l'kamam beproti yiseiser, as shall be explained later in more detail. Okay. So that's the addition now of Torah Ohr over Ner Mitzvah and Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. This is from the Alter Rebbe. Now we're going to move on. We're going to move over to the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe takes this idea and is going to elaborate upon it a lot more in detail. And this breaks down into a whole section, which we're going to learn now. Let me see. It's going to go now quite a few pages, actually, if I recall correctly. 16, 17, 18, 19. Yeah. The next 4 pages, 16 through 19, are going to be dedicated to the Mittler Rebbe's explanation of Torah Ohr, of what is the light of Torah that we just discussed from the Alter Rebbe. Let me stop if there are any questions, and then we'll continue. Okay. So in the middle of page 16, he says like this now, Vihine. We're exactly 1, 2, 3, the 4th paragraph on page 16 of my summary, my essay, I should say. So he says like this, Vihine, and now, B'drush zeh shel Admur Hamsoi. This is very drush, as we know. The Alter Rebbe has the Maimer. The explanation of the Alter Rebbe, that we reviewed and summed up. Now we move over to the Mittler Rebbe. So this drush, Meseif Amid Tov Beis to Tov Chaf, for 18 pages, from page 402 to 420, Mayrech Bebir Advarim. He elaborates in explaining these ideas. Ulahalon hu kitzer v'tamtzis dvarav. And the following is a summary and a condensed summary of his words, of the Mittler Rebbe's words. So I'm not quoting the whole thing, all the 18 pages, obviously, but in the next 3 pages, 4 pages, I sum it up enough that can help us understand how the Rebbe Rashab would have most likely been cited as he would quote this in explaining what Torah Ohr is. And this is vital, because if you remember, and I'll sum it up again, Ayin Beis, especially the 2nd volume and the 3rd volume, divides into 2 parts. 550 pages are dedicated from middle of volume 2 to middle of volume 3, till page 1349, are dedicated to the Aveda of the Neshama Momata Lamayla, through prayer, primarily. That Neshama, through working its way up, connects the interface. The theme of Ayin Beis is the interface between the divine and existence from the bottom up. On page 1350, the Rebbe Rashab begins and says, and now we're going to discuss it L'mayla Lamata, how this interface is created from the top down. And that's primarily through Torah. So Torah Ohr plays a very prominent role here. Ner mitzvah is part of the picture. And of course, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. But Torah Ohr is what we really want to understand. What is the L'mayla Lamata in contrast to the Aveda Mamata Lamayla? And we'll talk later, we're going to discuss these 3 items. The Neshama, as it works from the bottom up, Mitzvos, which is a combination of from the bottom up and top down, and Torah, which is primarily top down, L'mayla Lamata. So now, understanding the Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, elaborates a lot more on the Alter Rebbe's original points, which is what we're going to now review. So he says like this, B'lashon HaKosov ner mitzvah v'Torah Ohr mashma, from the very expression in the verse, ner mitzvah, the candle or lamp of the mitzvah, and Torah Ohr, the light of Torah, from that it appears, the mitzvah is below Torah, zeu k'may ner below Ohr. That if you only had mitzvahs without Torah, you would have a candle without light. The alpha pishi is b'shem and psila, even though it has oil and a wick, ain't it klum. But that, in context of light, what's a wick and oil if it's not lit? You can have a wick and oil sitting there. Potentially, you need it in order to light, but you need a fire. You need the light. So from the expression ner mitzvah Torah Ohr, initially it would seem that ner mitzvah is only the candle part, the wick and the oil, and without Torah you don't have Ohr, you don't have light. Now earlier you may recall the Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek discussed, does ner mitzvah have its own light, or is the light only coming from Torah, and discussed 2 ways. And the Mittler Rebbe said, "Be'emes mashma," that in truth, it's mashma. Ner mitzvah also has light, but it's a smaller light, and Torah Ohr adds light. But here he's going back to the first interpretation, that on a very basic level, it sounds like ner mitzvah, mitzvah provides the candle, and Torah provides the light. And even though you have a wick, oil and a wick, ain't a klum without the Torah. But he's going to elaborate on this to get the whole picture going here. In other words, in practical terms, you can say when you do a mitzvah, not necessarily you have revelation, light, you're fulfilling what God wants. But who says there's a gilui involved? When you have Torah, Torah adds the part. But we'll see how he explains this. V'zeu gam be'esik b'mitzvah b'kavona b'usa deliba. And this would include not just the potential of doing a mitzvah, but even when you're busy doing a mitzvah with intention and with desire of the heart, which means you're emotionally involved, invested in it. Al yidei haneshama, through the soul shanikra psila, which is called the wick, as we learned earlier. The gam nikra ner, and this too is called a ner because you're doing the mitzvah. The neshama is doing the mitzvah and is doing it with intention and with heartfeltness, and it's called a ner. Ein a klum, still, it's not ein a klum, it's meaningless. Why? Lefi she'ein ein Hashem meir bo. I don't know if the word meaningless is the right translation. Ein a klum means it's like nothing because you don't have Eir Hashem. It's like a candle is in place, but it's not lit. So when you have a menorah, as much as everything is in place, if you don't light it, you haven't done the mitzvah of lighting a menorah. And here, without Torah Eir, ein a klum, lefi she'ein Eir Hashem meir bo, because the light of God is not radiating within it. Now the question you could ask, of course, is, what do you mean? You just did a mitzvah. Why is that not the light of Hashem? So apparently he's maybe suggesting that you don't have revelation. Again, you're doing it like a servant is following the orders. But when you do it with Torah Ohr that illuminates it, then it gives an element of it. But I don't want to jump and say that's the meaning, so let's just continue on reading and we'll see where he's going with this. But to say that is a big problem, the Rebbe Mittler Rebbe says. To make this statement that ner mitzvah ain't a klum without Torah Ohr, because it doesn't have light, is a major problem. If you make that statement, seemingly there's a big contradiction to that. From the common mechanics, from a number of places, shegozru oimer that ikir hu amaisa, that the Chazal, the Torah, declared and decreed that the primary thing is maisa, action, the action of mitzvahs, v'loya medrash, and not the medrash. So to make a statement that when you have a mitzvah, it's ain't a klum, it's like nothing because you don't have the light of Torah, from many places appears exact opposite, is a contradiction to that maisa of mitzvahs is greater than medrash. Medrash is learning Torah. Are you saying that learning Torah is like the light, and without learning Torah you don't have ein a klum? How could you say that? So in other words, we need an explanation why the pasuk says Torah Ohr, and by mitzvah it only says ner mitzvah. If it doesn't mean that the mitzvah doesn't have light, so what's the point? So obviously he's going to explain that Torah Ohr adds a whole new level of light. But he's building the case slowly by first saying that initially it may appear that ner mitzvah is with like a ner without light, like a candle without an unignited, an unlit candle. But he says there's a big stira to that from the fact that we see in a number of places that that ikar is the maisa, the action of mitzvahs. That's all a quote from the Mittler Rebbe. Now I continue to write, Ayin Sham, meaning look into the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Shemevi Kamarayis, he brings many proofs. He brings a number of proofs. Including the statement that God desired to have a home in Tachtenim, in the lowest of worlds, and that's dafke through Maisa. B'mailas Maisa mitzvahs ala Torah. He brings a number of proofs to show the advantage and superiority of the actionable mitzvahs over Torah. Lefi, and this is a quote from the Mittler Rebbe, Lefi shebemaisa atzmo zeu etzem haratzon shelamayla min hatam. Because in this very action that Hashem wants us to do an action, to keep Shabbos, to put on tefillin, tzitzis, light a candle, etc., that is the etzem haratzon. That's the very core desire that's higher than reason. Torah talks about the reasons for mitzvahs, why you do it, the logic behind it. But the mitzvah, that's etzem haratzon. Iker primius hatainog haposher ta'atzmi. This is the primary inner seamless pleasure, ha'atzmi, core seamless pleasure. Shelamayla gamin ha'chachma de Torah. That's higher also than the wisdom of Torah. No matter how deep the Torah's wisdom, the tainug, the pleasure God gets from our actions, is even greater than that. So all that, like he said, is a stira to say that ner mitzvah is nothing without Torah Ohr, when in so many places we learn the opposite, that mitzvahs are even more powerful, more important than Torah. Or let's put it not important, but that are the ikr. The primary goal is the mitzvahs. The Eich Omar says, concludes the Mittler Rebbe. So how could he say the mitzvah shenikra ner, the nikra which is called a candle, only a candle, v'atera Ohr, and Torah is called light, shemuva mizeh, that language seems to imply the ein Ohr klal b'mitzvah b'loy Ohr de Torah, that there's no light, there's no divine revelation in mitzvah without the Ohr of Torah. Like the first interpretation that he brought earlier, when we just established that mitzvahs in many ways is more primary even than Torah. So we need to understand what is the word ner, why is mitzvah called a ner and Torah is called Ohr when a mitzvah has such power. And that's what he's going to come to explain. So you see here how the Mittler Rebbe is taking the Alter Rebbe's theme and going to unpack it and develop it. Because the Alter Rebbe doesn't address this point. He just says there's ner mitzvah, and even more, there's Torah Ohr, the Rebbe Rashab called Ohr Atzmi, the Ohr before the Tzimtzum. But the Mittler Rebbe wants to understand why. Why is Torah greater than mitzvah? When we know that mitzvah has so many milas, that Torah that's even higher than Torah because of its maisa, because it's the etzem harotz and etzem hatainug. And this that I just quoted is all from the bottom of page Tov Beis, Tov Gimel 402 and 403 in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, citing the actual language. This is a very fundamental question, and of course now compels us to go deeper into understanding what ner mitzvah is and what Torah is, which is, from the pasuk it seems that the mitzvah, like he just said, is ner without Ohr, without Torah, and on the other hand we find the mitzvah has such power. So how do we explain that? So that's the question on the table now, that the Mittler Rebbe is now going to elaborate in the next 3 pages. I'm summing up 18 pages of the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe. So Mittler Rebbe takes 18 pages to explain this. We're going to sum it up in 3 pages. And I'm now the last paragraph on page 16. So now he begins to explain. Umavayir, the Mittler Rebbe explains. Where? On page 403, 404. Again, in Maimori Admur Amtsoi. Those are the pages in the original Maimer in the Sefer called Maimori Admur Amtsoi, Chanukah. Umavaya, she is quote. Wherever there's a quote, it's a direct quote straight from the Mittler Rebbe. Here I quoted more sections. Earlier I quoted entire pieces, so I just quoted the whole thing, and then at the end said At Kan L'Shene, that's the language. But here I do it more in a little more intermittently and connect it with my own words of a connection. Because, as I said, I'm summing up 18 pages. I didn't want to quote 18 pages, so I'm doing it more just the main key points. So he says like this, Umavayir, she has beis mine Ohr. So here again you see Mittler Rebbe elaboration. The Alter Rebbe didn't say this, but the Mittler Rebbe is. It's not a contradiction, obviously. The Mittler Rebbe is elaborating Bina, the Chachma of the Alter Rebbe, by elaborating that there's 2 types of Ohr. So there already you're starting to see the answer. So when you say Torah Ohr and ner mitzvah, there's 2 types of Ohr. Echad Ohr de Torah, One is the light of Torah, haba b'tzimtzum achar hacheshech. This is the light of Torah that comes in a diminished way after the darkness, shu b'chinas hahelem v'hester. After the darkness, that is the concealment and the covering. And going back to the classic example that I've been using earlier, kamoy harav, like a teacher, shemitzamtzum u'maylim ba'atzmei, who condenses or contracts and conceals within himself rechiv emek haseichel v'achachma, the expansiveness, the breadth of the concept and the wisdom. That's one level of Ohr. It's an Ohr, because when he's conveying when he's communicating and conveying the idea to the student is getting something. It's not utter darkness, it's not utter silence. However, he's getting something through a filter and a regulator called the Tzimtzum that the teacher is employing in order to convey the idea. So think of a teacher teaching a student Aleph Beis. I'm just using Aleph Beis. It could also be a simple Mishnah, it could be anything, but Aleph Beis is like the basic. So what is the teacher giving the student? A very diminished flow. There is Ohr, he's learning about Aleph, Beis, Gimel, but no way can you compare it to the Ohr Pre-Tzimtzum. So there is a Ohr, but it's a Ohr that comes following the Helem and the Tzimtzum. Now this brackets that I wrote here was because when I wrote this essay, it was around Yud Shvat time, and I noticed that there's a comparison here to the Maimer of Basar Legani from the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe. Basar Legani we learn on Yud Shvat, and the Rebbe's Maimerim this past Yud Shvat was chapter 15, explaining chapter 15 of Basar Legani, both the Rebbe's Maimer in 1955 and 1975. So, I'm sorry, 1965 and 1985. Sorry, chapter 15, not chapter 5. So the brackets, I'm going to read it because since I wrote it already, might as well. And I'm saying, I'm commenting that look at the language there of the Mittler Rebbe, quote, She'omuk omuk hu behelam acher helam bilti yuven v'yusag. When you say omuk, depth after depth, it's referring a concealment after a concealment that's bilti yuven, that's not understandable and comprehensible. Ulakaman sham seif ametov zayin, and further down the Mittler Rebbe on bottom of page 407, he says, quote, Lefi she'erein sof l'mayla ad ein ketz, l'mayla ad ketz, maybe missing a word, not sure. And so Erein sof is higher without end. Be'ilui acher ilui, behelam atzmusei bli shir. One elevation higher than another, in concealed in atzmus, without limit, without end. Deima, so here's my comment. This is similar to the language lahaloshin b'reish perek tezvav behemshech Basar Legani Tovshin Yud, at the beginning of chapter 15 in the Maimer Basar Legani Tovshin Yud 1950. Daskinim b'yomim elu, that we are involved in during these days, because as I said, I wrote that period of time when we were learning that Maimer, when people were learning that Maimer Yud Shvat time. So just a footnote, just to show a comparative language that seemed very similar, and just for discussion purposes. But let's get back now to the Mittler Rebbe's content. So that's the first level of Ohr. Ohr de Torah haba b'tzimtzum achar hacheshech. Aval madrega habeis ba'Ohr. Mittler Rebbe continues now. There's a second level of Ohr of Torah. Zeh b'chinas Ohr shelamayla harbe mecheshech. How about the Ohr pre-Tzimtzum? The Ohr before the teacher limited the flow to the student. It's much higher than the Cheshech. Shehu ha'helem v'atzimtzum arishin. No, with pre-Tzimtzum, the concealment and Tzimtzum arishin that the Alter Rebbe used before when he explained it in the beer in the Torah Ohr. So this is a higher level of Ohr. V'hainu liyas b'chinas Ohr atzmi the Ein Sof Baruch Hu. And here he's using the expression clearly, Ohr atzmi. This is the language that the Rebbe Rashab used when he explained Torah Ohr. This is an Ohr Atzmi, not an Ohr that is being filtered and regulated, but a core energy, as it is prior to being diminished and concealed. The Zehu, and how is that in the example that we said before, the teacher and the student? So the first level of Ohr is the intelligence that the teacher is transmitting to the student in a diminished and filtered way. This is Zeu K'may Arava Mashpia Shemagala Kol Pchinis Primis Ve'atzmus Chachma. Here's how the teacher, the Mashpia, is revealing all the inner and core elements of the idea, not in a diminished way. As it is in his core, which he did not do in the Ohr that goes after the Tzimtzum. You're not getting the core energy. Without any concealment and covering and garment covering at all. And on the contrary, on the contrary, not only is it not concealed, it's all being revealed. Everything that was in a state of Helen v'Hester, like we said before, Megala Amukis Minei Cheshech, he's revealing all the depths, all the secrets are revealed Kameshahu as they are, unfiltered. V'hu ha'oyer shalifnei hatzimtzum l'mayla mekol Helen v'Cheshech, and that's the Ohr pre-Tzimtzum, higher than any level, higher than all concealment and darkness. Shesharshe, called. This is back. We're now on page 17. We're moving to the next page. Shesharshe ba'atzmus the moed. It's rooted in the core of the moed, of the luminary, of the source. Shemeir er shalei ha'atzmis shalafonov. I'm sorry, ha'atzmis. That there is radiating the Ohr, the core energy as it is in his core. Shalafonov vade niglu kol talumes. Before him, meaning in the case like the teacher, or in this case the Eibishter, Elikus, before the Tzimtzum, is certainly all the consumed, all his secrets are revealed. The Cheshech Ha'elyon of the higher Cheshech, v'lo nikra Cheshech ayamukis klal, and before him it's not even called darkness or depths. Like amukim, like you said, amuk, deeper and deeper. It's not called that at all because everything is revealed. So here you have two levels of Ohr. So we're clearly going to be two levels of Torah Ohr. One, like he said, an Ohr that comes after the Tzimtzum, that flows to the student. In this case, that flows to Ishtalshlus, to existence. And an Ohr pre-Tzimtzum, that's not subject to all these filters. And on the contrary, everything is revealed there.
Can you take a question?
Let me just see if I want to take a question right now, or we need to finish the subject. Let me just see something. Okay, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. And the first type of Ohr that he discusses, and you quote the mimer, Lefisha Orient Sof, Lamaila, whether it's in Ketz or Ad Ketz, but Ili Achar Ili, elevation after elevation, Behelim in the concealment in this essence without measure. But I'm confused by this idea of Helam in the highest realm. Now, I understand there's the Helam Ha'atzmi, but I don't understand the association of Torah Ohr with Helam Ha'atzmi, if that's what he's saying here, because he's saying this level of Ohr after the Tzimtzum is diminished, like a transformer stepped down, if you will. But whereas the second type of Torah Ohr is it's Pre-Tzimtzum.
He's not talking about the second type. Here he's talking in the first type.
I know.
The Ohr before the Tzimtzum is concealed, completely concealed. Amuk, Helam Acher Helam, and it's not being transmitted to the student after the Tzimtzum. That's what this bracket is coming before the second level. He's talking about the first level.
I'm really confused. The second one is the higher level of Madriga Habes, but
Madriga base comes after my bracket. My bracket is on the first level, not on the second level.
Yes, I understand.
The first level, the Ohr, before the Tzimtzum gets concealed, and that remains concealed in Helam Acher Helam, darker and darker and darker, Lamai Lamai Adin Ketz, and it's not revealed to the student after the Tzimtzum. That's all this bracket is saying.
I get that it's not concealed to the student; it's not revealed to the student. But I guess I'm having a hard time. Look, I'm not. Rabbi's not wrong. I'm not understanding it. So let's be clear.
We're talking about the Tzimtzum as it's concealed from us, concealment after concealment, and we have no access to it initially.
But the Tzimtzum is what conceals.
And that's exactly what the first level, the Tzimtzum conceals, and that's why it's concealed. From our point of view, it's concealed. It's amuk, like he says, amuk behelam acher helam, and we don't understand it. He's not talking about the revelation of the Ohr before the Tzimtzum. That's level 2.
I would think that the Ohr after the Tzimtzum is the Helam, but the Ohr pre-Tzimtzum is without the Helam.
But from the point of view after the Tzimtzum, it is Behelam.
For us, is what you're saying.
Helam acher helam, yeah.
But he says acher ilui, elevation after ilui behelam. That it's concealed in its high status. It's, I guess what he's saying is it's so elevated.
I would just recommend that you should go to the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, because I'm just summing it up. You look there, you'll see the long.
I understand the concepts. I'm having a hard time with the language. That's all. And anyways, it's okay. You explained it. It's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, so let's go now. The next paragraph on page 17. So now that he's established there's 2 levels of Ohr, he says like this now. This second level of Ohr, which is Ohr Atzmi, and everything is revealed there, Hu b'chinas Ohr de Torah Mitzvos dafke. I know he used the word mitzvahs, but he means here Torah primarily, not as a ner mitzvah, but as everything part of Torah and mitzvahs. That this is the level of Ohr de Torah mitzvahs dafke, she'omar v'Torah Ohr. We're referring to when we say v'Torah Ohr, the Torah of light. What level of Ohr is this? So he says, Shehu Pnimius HaChochmeh de Atzmis Ein Sof Mamish. That's referring to the inner dimension of wisdom, which is Chochmeh de Atzmis Ein Sof Mamish, of Atzmis Ein Sof Mamish, Bechinas Ohr HaAtzmis Upnimius. The core and inner Ohr, what he called before the Ohr, before the Tzimtzum, that's not subject to the filters that the Tzimtzum imposes. That is like the Ohr that radiates on its own, pre-Tzimtzum, pre the first Tzimtzum. Why does Torah have this? If everything in existence is subject to the Tzimtzum, and the Ohr that everything in existence receives is through the Tzimtzum, why is Torah different? Because Torah is not a part of creation. Torah, the wisdom of Torah is not just scientific wisdom. It's not just the design of existence that God used. Kulam b'chachma sisa. He used the wisdom to create the fascinating design of existence. This is referring to the atzmis, this chachma Torah, within it dwells the core Eidens of Mamish Kamoy Shahaya Lifnei Tzimtzum Shayahu Ushmai Bilvad. Torah manifests divine consciousness as was pre-Tzimtzum, when there was only him and his name alone. So we're talking about a completely divine perspective of things, not the divine perspective through the lens of existence. In other words, you're not seeing the wisdom of the artist within the art. There's no art here. Here you're just seeing the wisdom of God Himself, which manifests in of Mamish, the way it is pre-Tzimtzum. Bechinas Ayin Beis Amiti. That's taken from the Maimon of the Mittler Rebbe, but different lines. So this is the Ayin of Yesh Amiti, not the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra. The Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is the Ohr after the Tzimtzum that is tailored and commensurate to each part of existence. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti is the Ohr that just reflects Atzmos. And then he adds, quote, V'agam she'achachma de Torah Ohr yorda gam kem b'bchinas ha'ishtalshlus. And though this Chachma of Torah Ohr didn't remain lifnei tzimtzum, it also entered into the domain and the realm post Tzimtzum. Torah was given to us below. So Yarda b'chinas ha'ishtalshlus kamei b'derech bria ma'ayin liyesh. Like in the form of bria ma'ayin liyesh, because it enters into a world of creation, and the Torah speaks about creation. Breishis bara addresses creation. It guides us. It all engages itself with the affairs of this world. Nevertheless, ein be'er zeh shinui mahus klal. And yet, this Ohr, even as it enters post-Tzimtzum reality, there's no change in its personality at all. The Tzimtzum that affects Ohr, that creates existence, there is a shinui. Because now it's an energy that is commensurate to Yehirakia, to Yitzeres Desh, or whatever, the details of existence. Elazeo Eise Ohr the Atzmos Mamash Alifnei Helam V'Atzimtzum. The Ohr, even as Torah descends and is given to us down below, retains the Ohr of Atzmos Mamash as it was before the concealment and the Tzimtzum. End quote. And this is all, the language is coming from Seif Amud Tov Dalet Tozbov, again quoting the Mittler Rebbe exactly so you can trace the source for this. Bottom of page 404 to 406. So as again, I'm summing up here 18 pages of Mittler Rebbe, and I'm indicating which section is coming from which page. Okay. We'll stop again for any questions. So that's paragraph number 2 on page 17. So to just sum up, 2 levels of Ohr. When the teacher teaches a student, a beginner student, he's only getting a certain limited flow. He's definitely not revealing the deeper secrets and the deeper depths of the teacher's mind. And then there's the higher level of Ohr, which is Pre-Tzimtzum, and there everything is revealed, all the secrets and all the depths. We haven't yet discussed how exactly it works in our lives, but so far he's established that and explained that even the way Torah comes down below, it retains that higher level. And yet he still said there's a level of Ohr that is affected by the Tzimtzum, Ohr the Torah. So we have to still understand what's the difference between the 2 levels of Ohr. But we'll get to that, obviously. So I'll continue reading the next paragraph.
Is he saying that both of these 2 types of Torah Ohr are what we experience as a function of the revelation?
I just said he didn't finish. He didn't conclude. He just stated there's 2 levels of Torah Ohr, and he didn't yet bring it down into how we relate to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Next paragraph. Quote again. V'sheiresh hatam lezeh, and the root reason, the root cause, the b'chinas Ohr de Torah, that the light of Torah, megala, lekol, b'chinas hester v'helam. So the question, lekol or kol b'chinas hester v'helam, you can read it both ways, but the bracket indicates a different manuscript. So regardless, it's basically that the Torah reveals all concealments and all secrets. So what's the Sheiresh Hatam? Why is the root of the reason? So till now he said because Torah is rooted before the Tzimtzum. So even after the Tzimtzum, it retains that element that the Tzimtzum doesn't impact it. But he's going to explain further now. And yet again brings that verse that the Alter Rebbe brought, the Rebbe Rasha brought, that reveals the depths from within the darkness. Gam la'emek de'emek shebehelam da'atzmis ein sof. Also, the depths of the depths in the helam of atzmis ein sof. That's what Torah does. And we're talking, of course, the higher level, because the lower level does not reveal that. So what is the tam, the Sheresh HaTam? Lefisha b'chinas chachma de Torah nikra koyach ma. He's not going to explain why Torah, what feature, what personality does Torah have that allows it to be such a keli, such an instrument, such a channel for such high level, deep level, and secret levels of the divine. Because the Torah, chachma of Torah is called koyach ma. Remember, chachma is made up of two words. Koyach, the power of ma of bittul. Koyach ma, as in ma and bittul. Koyach ma. Pirish, ma, bli muhuz dover. What is the meaning of the word ma? So when we say ma, we mean what? When I say mazeh, you say, what is this? That's a simple, of course, a simple pedestrian Hebrew. But if you think about it, ma is a wonder. It's bli muhuz dover. It's indicating on something that, what is that? What was that? You say that when something amazes you. Or in this case, he says, without muhus. Bli muhus dover. I missed the word. Bli muhus dover ma. So ma is saying it doesn't have any substance. So that's why you say what? Shebilte nidali yesh v'dover ma klal. Because it doesn't in any way appear as any identity, anything that you could point at. So when you say, for example, an idea flows into your head, you say, where did that come from? What was that? Like a flash. Like we all see when you have an idea. It's hard, you can't trace where it came from. That means something who's dover ma. That's ultimate bittul. It's not just that you are humble and that you are the deferential. It's that you're sensing something that doesn't have substance. So in this world, it's the diametric opposite of yesh. So like ayin and yesh, ma and yesh. So ma and ayin are essentially synonymous in this context. Shebilta nidil yesh v'dover ma klal. Al kain ein dover master klal. So since Chochmah doesn't have any identity, so it becomes a transparent channel for whatever's flowing through it. So Chochmah, the Torah, he's saying, doesn't have dover master klal. Mitzvos klal is bechinas habitl mitzias betachlis. Being that it's utterly selfless and transparent, whatever flows through it remains exactly intact. So if I convey an idea to you, and you then convey the idea to someone else, so you could do it two ways. You could do it through your filter, and you bring your identity into it, and your explanation, and your understanding. So the idea is not going to be exactly the way I said it. It's going to be with your interpretation. However, if you just be like a chayzer, when we were chayzerim of the Rebbe, our job was not to filter in any way, just to give you, convey what was said without any interpretation, without any processing. So then, the one who's conveying it is not going to alter or change in any way the original idea. So Chochmah the Torah, he's saying, is what it really is. It's personified by bittul. It doesn't have any. All it is a channel for Hashem's wisdom, and as such, bli muhuz davar. So it's not. It can't add. It's not going to add anything or subtract or diminish or in any way alter or change the flow, like a funnel. A funnel, a clean funnel that doesn't have any additives, is just going to funnel the oil straight to the recipient. If you mix things into it, or there's some other factors that are get involved, then obviously it's going to some way dilute it or change it or alter it. She says that's the Sheresh HaTam. So Torah originates from Pre-Tzimtzum. But the question is how Torah is carrying that energy. So when it comes to Ohr, from this you can imply that it comes to Ohr, for example, when God created existence. So there Hashem said, Yehi Ohr, Yehi Rakia, Teitzi Eretz Desha, Yehi Ma'eres. He spelled out, I want to now create vegetation. I want to create a heaven. I want to create animals. I want to create the sun and the moon. So all of that is a language that's taking the Ohr. It's no longer Ohr Pashut, a seamless, bleak vool energy. It's an energy that's creating a sun and a moon and not something else. So the Ohr is already being shaped. And that's the kavanah. There's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly what God wants. When it comes to Torah, you're getting the closest thing to God's wisdom, undiluted and unshaped by anything else. It's purely expressing the divine. That's what he's saying here. And that's why if you want to have Pnimius and Atzmis of Ein Sof, the core, the inner and core of it, it only resides in a state of ayin, because if there was any yesh, it couldn't be the Pnimius. In some way, it would be altered. It wouldn't retain its Pnimius and Atzmisdika personality. It would go. It would be going through a filter in some way. But who mishum the kol shu b'chinas ayin, because anything that's in a state of ayin and bittul, hamushal umufshit beheder hargoshes yeshu mitzias davar, that absolutely negates and is stripped of any hergish, any feeling of yesh, of ego, of identity. Davar ma legamri kol v'kol bezed dafke sheira me'er ha'atzmus de ein sof. So you have to be completely empty of anything if you want to really be a channel for the pure core, undiluted essence. And this he calls Shenikra Ayin Amiti or Yesha Amiti. That's a quote from the Mittler Rebbe. Those are the words he uses. This level is called Ayin Amiti or Yesha Amiti. We can discuss what he means by that, but I'll do that afterwards. I quote, that's on page 407, he says that language. Shalafon of Nigla Kol Ha'elam. And therefore it reveals all secrets, because before him, the Etzem, everything is revealed. There's no concealments. And now Torah is not concealing, is not in any way filtering or altering it. So therefore Torah reveals all the secrets. It's a direct channel to the core essence without any dilution or any regulation or any shaping or changing. And that's why that's a Sheresh Atam, that the Torah reveals the deepest secrets of Atzmus Ein Sof. And this is all from page 407 and 408 in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. As you see, we're going along here before we're doing earlier pages, the continuing summary of the Mittler Rebbe's 18 pages on the topic of Torah Ohr. And I'll stop here, take any questions, of course. Okay. This is quite a fundamental piece, actually. So I'm underscoring that, underlining it, highlighting it, I should say, because it gives a powerful understanding of the difference between the wisdom of Torah and all other scientific wisdom, whether it's physical, the social, or the political sciences. Because there, as I pointed out a number of times, the wisdom is I'm understanding existence. It's all about understanding the yesh. Here, it's all about understanding God. Torah is simply conveying God as he is in his purest form, not as he manifests in any of his creations or creatures. Just adding that to one line. But there's more to say on this. As I said, I'll stop here. Again, any questions before I...
Rabbi Jacobson, you know how we obviously have the two different tracks and two different concepts of the Nishmat Adam and the Mitzvot, and they're both of a candle. So how do you parallel the Neshamot with the Mitzvot? Because obviously they're both represent the wick. So you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but why are you asking this question right now when we have?
But maybe we should stop the recording. I was going to ask it later. It's just been, I just wanted to ask. That's all. If it's off topic, we could discuss it afterwards.
No, it's not off topic. It actually belongs to what we discussed last week when we spoke about Ner Mitzvah and Ner Shem.
Correct.
Right now, he's discussing the comparison of Ner Mitzvah and Torah Ohr. Just for the record, I just
yes.
Your question belongs in the discussion of Ner. I'll talk about it. I can talk about it after the.
Sure.
I'd rather talk about it not in this very context.
I understood.
It's going to be confusing.
Yes, I understand.
Okay, so let's stop here. Middle of page 17, right? We're on 17. We did the first 3 paragraphs on page 17. Okay, so 16 through 17. I'll stop the recording.